The story of the fall of the Aztec Empire is one of the most surprising and dramatic events in world history. For a long time, it was told as the almost impossible feat of a small group of Spanish conquistadors led by Hernán Cortés, who managed to defeat one of the most powerful empires of the American continent almost on his own.
But modern historical studies reveal a far more complex reality, made of alliances, epidemics, internal tensions, and a war that involved tens of thousands of indigenous fighters.
When Hernán Cortés left Cuba in 1519 with a relatively small expedition, about 500 soldiers, a few horses, and some firearms, he did not yet have a clear plan to conquer an empire. Officially, the mission was to explore and establish trade contacts with the peoples of the Gulf of Mexico coast. However, Cortés was an ambitious man and quickly realized that the political situation in the region could offer enormous opportunities. The first information about the Aztecs reached the Spaniards through the coastal peoples. Many local communities lived under the rule of the Mexican Empire and paid heavy tribute to Tenochtitlan. This imperial system, which for the Aztecs was an effective way to maintain control of the territory, also generated deep tensions and resentment. Cortés quickly understood that the best way to face the empire was not to fight it directly, but to exploit these divisions. One of the most important encounters of the expedition was with Malintzin, also known as La Malinche or Doña Marina. She was a Nahua woman who spoke several indigenous languages and became Cortés's interpreter and advisor.
Her presence was crucial because it allowed the Spaniards to communicate with different Mesoamerican peoples and better understand the Aztec political system.
Through strategic alliances, Cortés managed to build a network of local support. The most important alliance was with the Tlaxcalans, a people who had long been at war with the Aztecs. Instead of destroying the Spaniards when they had the chance, the Tlaxcalans decided to cooperate with them to overthrow the power of Tenochtitlan. This alliance completely changed the balance of the war. It was no longer a few hundred conquistadors against an empire, but a coalition of thousands of indigenous warriors also led by the Spaniards. In November 1519, Cortés and his allies entered the Aztec capital, Tenochtitlan, a city that left the Europeans speechless. The accounts of the conquistadors describe an extraordinary place. Great temples, enormous markets, canals crossed by canoes, and a population that probably exceeded 100,000 inhabitants.
It was one of the largest cities in the world at that time.
The Aztec ruler Montezuma II welcomed the Spaniards with caution and diplomacy. Historical sources do not completely agree on what he truly thought. Some Spanish chronicles suggest that Montezuma might have seen Cortés as a figure connected to religious prophecies, perhaps associated with the return of the god Quetzalcoatl. However, many modern historians believe that this interpretation was exaggerated or reinterpreted by the Spaniards after the conquest. The situation in the capital soon became extremely fragile. Cortés decided to take a radical step. He imprisoned Montezuma inside the royal palace and began to rule the city indirectly through him. This act marked the beginning of a deep political crisis. In 1520, tensions exploded. During an Aztec religious festival, some conquistadors led by Pedro de Alvarado attacked and massacred many Mexican nobles and priests in what became known as the Massacre of the Templo Mayor. This event provoked a general uprising among the population of Tenochtitlan. The Spaniards were forced to flee the city on the night of June 30th, 1520, an event known as La Noche Triste. During the escape, many soldiers and indigenous allies died in the city's canals while trying to cross the destroyed bridges. It seemed like the end of Cortés's expedition. However, the Spaniards and their allies quickly reorganized. Meanwhile, another devastating factor was completely changing the balance of the war: diseases brought from Europe. One of the most destructive was smallpox, which arrived in Mexico around 1520. Indigenous populations had no immunity to this disease, and the epidemic spread rapidly among the cities of the region, including Tenochtitlan. Modern demographic studies suggest that these epidemics drastically reduced the indigenous population within just a few years. The consequences were enormous from both a political and military perspective. Among the victims of smallpox was the new Aztec emperor Cuitlahuac, who had led the resistance against the Spaniards after Cortés' escape. In 1521, Cortés launched the final offensive against Tenochtitlan. This time he did not attack the city directly, but organized a strategic siege. He had brigantines, small armed boats, built to allow the Spaniards to control Lake Texcoco and cut off the capital's supplies.
For months, the city was slowly destroyed. Spanish troops and indigenous allies advanced neighborhood by neighborhood, while hunger, disease, and constant fighting devastated the population. According to many historical sources, including Historia Verdadera de la Conquista de la Nueva España by Bernal Díaz del Castillo, the battles were extremely violent and involved tens of thousands of indigenous fighters on both sides. On August 13, 1521, Tenochtitlan finally fell. The last Aztec emperor, Cuauhtémoc, was captured while attempting to flee the city across the lake. The conquest marked the end of the Aztec Empire as an independent political power, but not the disappearance of the Mexica people.
In the following decades, Mesoamerican society was deeply transformed by Spanish colonial rule. Modern studies show that the conquest was followed by an enormous demographic collapse. Between epidemics, wars, and economic changes, the indigenous population of central Mexico declined dramatically during the 16th century.
However, Nahua culture did not disappear. Language, traditions, agricultural knowledge, and historical memory continued to survive within colonial society. Many documents written in Nahuatl, such as the Florentine Codex, still preserve the indigenous perspective on these events.
Archaeological research conducted in recent decades beneath Mexico City, built on the ruins of Tenochtitlan, continues to reveal new details about the Aztec capital and the final years of the empire. Excavations of the Templo Mayor, which began in the 20th century and are still ongoing today, have uncovered ritual offerings, architectural remains, and objects that help us better understand the religious and political life of the city before the conquest. Today, most historians agree on one key point: Cortés did not conquer the Aztec Empire alone. The fall of Tenochtitlan was the result of a combination of extraordinary factors: alliances with indigenous peoples hostile to the Aztecs, technological advantages in certain military areas, devastating epidemics, and internal crises within the empire. The conquest was therefore not simply a clash between two civilizations, but a complex war among many Mesoamerican societies in which the Spaniards managed to insert themselves as a new political actor. It is precisely this complexity that makes the story of the fall of the Aztecs one of the most fascinating and dramatic episodes in world history.